Good evening and welcome to the Center for Architecture. I'm Jesse Lazar. I'm Executive Director here at AI in New York and the Center for Architecture. We're so pleased to have you join us tonight for New York City Coastal Resilience, a dialogue. I want to thank particularly Donna Walkavage and Gretchen Bank from the AIANY Design for Risk and Reconstruction Committee, and also ASLA for co-organizing this event with DfRR. Tonight's discussion will be about the new Bureau of Coastal Resilience within New York City's Department of Environmental Protection, and how the new Deputy Commissioner, Laurian Farrell, is leading the city's efforts for our 520 miles of coastline. Tonight's speakers will discuss the development of ecologically, economically, and socially sensible solutions to urban environmental problems with a focus on climate change. And now I'd like to have Donna Walkavage come up and introduce our speakers tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm Donna Walkavage, and I'm a principal and landscape architect at Stantec, and as Jesse said, co-chair of the DfRR committee, along with Gretchen. I'm also a fellow of the ASLA, so I'm especially pleased to say that the ASLA is co-sponsoring tonight's event, which I now have to do a housekeeping task, which is if you're online, you are going to have to take a quiz that will pop up at the end, and you need to get 75% on it. So please listen carefully. I actually became involved in this committee when I represented the ASLA during the work that was happening in this building, which was incredible, right after Sandy, right after is a couple of years, working on new zoning and other types of issues for New York City that involve design and planning. And here I am. I stayed on. We're not finished yet. So I hope tonight's event shows you that we are making some progress. As a committee, as AIA, and as ASLA, we're all thrilled to be able to introduce Deputy Commissioner Farrell tonight. As Jesse said, she's the first person to lead this important work in a new bureau. And I just want to have a little plug here for Rit Agrawal, DEP Commissioner, for making this happen. So Laurian is a water resources engineer with a master's in landscape architecture. And as I've said in the past, resilience begins on site. She centers equity in her practice. She's been a stormwater engineer and spent 12 years leading flood management and infrastructure program in Toronto, seeking ways to more effectively plan for and protect against flood risks. I'm not going to go into her whole bio, but most recently she worked as a global director at the Resilient Cities Network. And there she developed a deep understanding of issues facing ultra-urban coastal cities, and I like ultra-urban because I sometimes go to other cities and roll my eyes and say, is this really urban? Joining her in conversation tonight is Dr. Franco Montalto. I first met Franco in his role as a founder and president of eDesign Dynamics, a firm that has always been out ahead of its time and out ahead of everybody else when dealing with green infrastructure, with sustainability and resilience. But Franco is also a professor at Drexel University, where he directs the Sustainable Water Resource Engineering Hub. He's a member of the 4th New York City Panel on Climate Change, and he wrote the Northeast chapter of the recent 5th National Climate Assessment. But to me, his great skill is in explaining the complex processes involved in urban flooding. So it's great to have you both here, and thank you very much.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Donna, for that introduction. Thanks to Donna and Gretchen for inviting us. Thanks, Commissioner, for being here tonight. Oh, sorry,
mics for
these things.
the Zoom people. Yeah.
Okay, I was just saying thank you to the organizers for organizing this event, and thanks to the Commissioner for spending some time with us tonight. I thought Since this is sort of a moderated discussion, I would start by saying welcome to New York.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we know some things. We know that you're from Canada originally. We know you're an engineer. We know you're a landscape architect. We know you've worked on resilience in water. But I wonder if you want to just sort of start off by saying, a little bit about your background and what you're bringing to this position. Where were you before? What did you do exactly? Yeah.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first official speaking engagement in this new role, and I'm really excited. And so bear with me as I work out the kinks and all of my talking points. But my history, I know that down pat. So I've actually been here in New York for almost 5 years now. Yeah, and I am Torontonian. I was born and raised in Toronto. I did my first undergraduate degree in water resources engineering, and then I stumbled upon a report that I was doing my final engineering project on waterfront, what do you call those things where the boats go? Marinas. On marinas, and I stumbled across this report that was written by landscape architects, and I was just blown away about how the landscape architects visualized the information, and not like anything I had ever seen in engineering, and then I just fell in love with that, so I went and did my master's in landscape architecture, and really focused on bioengineering, and I was always, large-scale sort of parkland development, river restoration, that was always my focus, still sticking with my water. But I ended up not working as a landscape architect. I went back to engineering to get my professional engineering designation and fell in love with engineering too. And that sort of took me on this journey of learning about systems, riverine systems, which led me to other systems, aquatic systems, and I worked at the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, which is it's a regulatory authority, sort of in between the city and provincial level. We did development permitting. We did a lot of the environmental studies on behalf of 9 municipalities in the region. That's where I ventured into flood forecasting and warning, hydraulic modeling, and all the things that go along with that. But we also operated large-scale infrastructure. We had a couple of large-scale dams. And I'll talk a little bit more later about sort of the philosophy of flood control in Ontario, which is very, very different than the United States.
Let's get into that. I mean, that's
Okay,
I think, a big part of that. I mean, we're going to get to it eventually,
Yeah,
but I mean, the
well, it's
philosophy.
different. It's, in Ontario, in 1954, we had a hurricane, Hazel, which is very rare that a hurricane would actually make it over the Great Lakes. 80 people died, and there were already conservation authorities in place, but they were really for reforestation. And after the hurricane, the province decided somebody needed to be paying more attention to the floodplains. So the conservation authorities became responsible for floodplain management, for regulating the floodplain, and we drew our flood limits based on Hurricane Hazel. And it was so super conservative, and you're not allowed to build in the floodplain. And that's how we manage our flooding.
And it's remained.
Almost
One event that drove the floodplain.
drove the floodplain. There are some different rules where you could do some limited expansion if you had a historic property, but for the most part, you must build outside of the flood limits, and there's no flood insurance. It's a very, very different system. And I always used to say, though, that it could be, it's a policy. Policies can be changed, and we actually came really close to having a conservative government change and take away all the powers of the conservation authorities recently, but the public pushed back, and they remain in place today.
So not to expand the floodplain, but to remove the designation or the
Take
protection.
all the
take it
regulations
all
of
down.
protection away so we could build in the floodplain. Yeah.
Interesting questions about floodplains in New York City, about what the definition is of a floodplain in a place like New York, which has some streams and rivers, but as we've seen some of these events, the flooding can happen almost anywhere in New York. So
That's right.
So it's an interesting. So I want to get into that later, but let's finish the rest of your.
Well, and I will finish, but I will say one parallel is, though, that we were so focused on riverine flooding for 70 years, and then with flashy thunderstorms coming every summer and the storm sewer systems being overwhelmed, it became really clear that maybe this isn't our problem anymore. We've got this on lock now. We know what to do with rivers, but what are we going to do with all of this urban drainage?
Right.
And so, yeah, very similar conversation we were having in Toronto, and really in cities around the world as this conversation we're having here in New York. But in New York, it's just on steroids, right, obviously.
Right.
So I worked in flood forecasting and warning, Conservation Authority. I started around 2011, 2012, thinking some of these projects that we're doing on flood mitigation, we never really talked about people in our discussions. We're always looking at maps, we're always looking at outlines of houses on drawings and saying, well, 2.5 people live there and multiplying for our risk, and it started to fall really flat for me. Also because I was the media spokesperson, so every time it rained, I'd be on TV saying, stay away from the rivers, and wondering if anybody listening to this, like, do they even care? And then I would be with reporters, and they would be, come stand in the river with me while we do this interview. And I'd have to say, no, this is anti-messaging. And I'd be vexed because I'd go home and watch the news, get my VCR out, and they do my little clip, but then the next clip would be the reporter standing in the river saying, this is really dangerous, the Conservation Authority says. And so just the disconnect between the power of water and what we're trying to do just led me to think, like, our messages are not getting out there. So that led me to discover this whole conversation about resilience and holistic urban resilience. But before I started working in resilience, I went to work at a city named Brampton, which is just north of Toronto. And I led their environmental department.
How big of a city?
600,000. And so small-ish, but a good medium-sized city, and you can get a lot done. And I found this with the Resilient Cities network as well. In a city around 300 to 600,000 people, you can really make change happen quickly because it's just more nimble, right? And in a city like New York, it's so big, you have to factor in much more time to make big disruptive changes, right? Anyway, so fast forward, I learned about resilience. I met my husband, who's a New Yorker, and we were trying to figure out who would come to which country. And I said, okay, well, whoever gets the job they want first will move. And I got a job at 100 Resilient Cities, which was a Rockefeller Foundation program. And I moved, and I don't know if you guys know about 100 Resilient Cities, but they shut down 4 months after I joined and moved to the United States. And so there was a story of resilience there.
Your resilience.
Yeah. And but it all worked out for the best. I needed that draw to bring me away from Canada and my family and to start this new chapter. And I learned so much there, even in 4 months, about resilience, about how to, the frameworks of resilience, about organizational change, and just having really positive, good attitudes toward whatever life throws your way. And I was fortunate to end up at the spin-off of that org, which is Resilient Cities Network. And I worked with 28 cities in North America, helping them figure out...
Different sizes, right?
All different sizes. Mostly the bigger ones, though, right? Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Miami. In Canada, it was Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. And just really got to see a lot of the inner workings of different cities then and how they were trying to implement resilience actions that they had identified in their resilience strategies. And then I also got a little bit of a global perspective there as well, because we're a global organization, and it was wonderful. But when I saw the job posting for this for this new role, I thought, oh my gosh, that's
Seems like the culmination of all of these experiences, modeling, sort of data analytics, working with different cities.
That's right.
So it comes all together into one position and one new bureau that you get to lead.
Yes, exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Now I wonder if we could sort of go there, because I think there's probably a lot of people anxious to hear sort of what will you do with this new bureau. And I know, in previous conversations we were talking about there's some sort of planning that you're doing, and then there's going to be some operational component to it. There's some capital projects that you want to see in the ground. But I wonder what your vision is of sort of how this bureau interfaces with some of the other governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations. I mean, here we've got we have a lot of people interested in these topics in a place like New York. So you want to say something about your vision and sort of where this bureau could be in a few years?
Yes, well, I mean, without a doubt, the excitement and the support for this bureau has been palpable. Everywhere I go, it's just people seem so eager to participate in making sure that we're successful, which is really nice.
You're successful, the city's successful. I mean, I think that's a large perception.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And New York, New York, you know this, New York is such an amazing, rich ecosystem of experts in every different field, in scholarly experts, environmental experts, there's just the consulting field is rich. Before I even knew this job existed, I was talking to a friend who works in water, and I was saying, if you want to work in water, New York is the place to be right now. And then here I am. So, because I've been thinking about resilience, when I was in Toronto, I was often thinking, I really just wish I had time to sit and think, because the work is so busy in a city. It's just constantly coming at you. And so I got that time away when I was working in the nonprofit space. And then I thought, oh, now I better, when I saw the job posting, I thought, that's a great job. I would never do that because it's a lot, right? And, but then I thought, well, no, I wanted the time to think. I've had it now. I will be useless if I don't try to apply it. And when I came to this role, my approach is that we need a holistic approach to flood protection in New York City. And we need to think about infrastructure that keeps the water out, but we equally need to spend as much attention to what do we do when we can't keep the water out, and how do we build community resilience along the coast. And what is community? What is resilience? and what is the coast? These are all questions we don't really know yet, right?
Yeah, and I really want to probe some of those questions, because that's sort of I think what everybody's interested in. I mean, your bureau is called the Bureau of Coastal Resilience, right? And then, in New York City, we've seen coastal flooding, right? We've seen Sandy, we've seen massive damages, but we've also seen pluvial flooding in the middle of the city, even, as recent as this year. So where do you draw the boundary between, is coastal resilience, is your charge the whole city? Or are you looking at a particular distance back or a particular tidal regime, or, where do you draw the distinction of what your office will do compared to other entities who might be talking about flooding in the middle of the city?
I'm not sure yet, and that's one thing we need to figure out, just from an operational point of view, just so people know what's their job and what's not. That's going to be really important to figure out. But as you said, there's 520 miles of coast, right? Almost every New Yorker is affected by the coast in some way, shape, or form. It is one water cycle, one system that's connected, and so we're going to have to undertake a process of deciding internally and with the help of experts outside what is the limit of this work. And if I'm looking at this as community resilience, communities who are affected by coastal flooding, that may actually extend beyond the floodplain. It may extend if a major travel route is through the floodplain. That may affect everybody that's in that catchment for that area. So right now, I'm looking at this as we're trying to keep the whole city safe from coastal flooding. We have to look at the integration between the stormwater and the coastal water, because we will have to get the timing down pat too about, are we going to close floodgates, which will then make rainfall trapped behind those floodgates for a certain period of time, or do we not close them? So where's the balance between? And so it's one system, and really at the end of the day, it's going to be about flooding, period. But I realize I have to draw the line somewhere, so I don't know yet, though. I'm working on it. I would say, though, that one thing I know for sure that our bureau will be responsible for is the deploying of coastal flood protection assets when they're built.
And there you mean literally the coast?
Yes. So if you look at the East Side Coastal Resilience work that Eric is in the crowd here leading, there are floodgates that need to be pulled shut, and we will pull those shut. That'll be our bureau that does that work. And if there are other active flood protection measures that need to be deployed, that'll come to us. There'll be an operations and maintenance component. So keeping the tide gates in working order, keeping the outfalls cleaned out, that will be our group. So in that way, the coastal line is very clear. But when it comes to the planning...
Whereas, I'm sorry, like deploying temporary flood barriers somewhere in the middle of the city would not be your bureau?
No, correct.
So where would that responsibility
So at the moment, interim flood protection measures are deployed by the NYCEM emergency management team.
Yeah.
As we move forward and some of these measures become more permanent, or I will say interim permanent, like we have a 20-year gap before we put infrastructure in place that will have a more permanent solution, we'll have to think about which bureau is best suited to maintain that sort of activity. Right now, some of the interim flood protection measures that are, say, protecting DEP assets, DEP is starting to take that activity on themselves, but it won't be this bureau.
So you've been talking about barriers and sort of deployable defenses. I wonder if we could sort of explode a little bit your idea on resilience strategies, right? Because I think those would fall within what I would characterize as resistance approach to resilience, right? Like, let's draw the boundary here. Let's say, the high water cannot come in, the heat cannot get into the building, right? There's a whole series of resilience strategies that are about protection. Then there's a whole series of resilience strategies that are about adapting, sort of like micro changes that allow you to continue to live the way you've been living, but to do it slightly differently. And then there's these sort of large-scale transformative approaches, like really big changes that respond to sort of dynamics that are, broad and long-term. And so I'm just, putting myself in your position, like how would you sort of find the right combination of those strategies as you think about this? I mean, how do you decide where a protective approach is more appropriate than an adaptive approach, or some discussion that's leading towards a really big fundamental change to that community?
I think first and foremost, you have to understand the values and the culture of the local communities so that you can then begin to apply criteria to make those decisions, right? And so some people will say, we do not want any hard infrastructure along this shoreline because we really value the environment, the aquatic habitat that is going to be lost. And others will say, we really need hardening here because we want to protect, for example, our economic engine of the city or this particular wastewater treatment plant. And there's going to be trade-offs, and those trade-offs will not be easy. But if we collectively create the criteria, then I think we will be able to at least advance solutions that the majority of people are happy about. Or if we can say, we understand that we're not going to be able to have this particular treatment here, and here are all the reasons why, and here's what we're going to do instead to try to meet your needs as well. I mean, we just have to do as much of that as we can, knowing that we're never going to get it all right. And I think on the hard infrastructure piece, it's going to be really important that we don't fight nature. And we also don't really even understand yet what is the future like 100 years from now. So if we build as much of the flexible infrastructure as we can, meaning as many nature-based solutions as we can, and lean toward that, but then understand where the erosive forces of these waves are just too great, that, all right, this is a scenario which is very New York specific in a way because we're so densely populated that we don't have as many opportunities to play around and to take our chances, right, and have a buffer. There's not a lot of buffer on the shorelines of New York. There will be places that need to be hardened, but can we make sure they're as flexible as possible and that they're not locking us into something for 150 years that we cannot adapt or change in any way when we know more, right?
So you mentioned something really interesting about, how we have to have a common set of criteria, right? So negotiate some of these questions in a place. There has to be agreement among multiple stakeholders about criteria. So, I mean, you've got government agencies that have decision-making roles that allow them to impact, buildings or infrastructure. And we have really vibrant community-based organizations who want to be part of these decisions as well. So what are the sort of consensus building strategies that you have? I mean, what's the forum in which community-based organizations and governmental decision makers and perhaps others who may bring in funding, interact and sort of negotiate and develop those criteria. And I'm just curious, like, what happens if you get criteria A, set A in this place, and criteria set B in that place? Is that fine? Is that just part of the democratic process?
Yes, yes. And so I'll answer the question, but then I'll ask you the question back, because I think that, New York is doing this right already. I think what's happened is because there wasn't really a one-stop shop for coastal resilience in the city, it was difficult for people to know where to go and to get the full picture of what was happening. And in the absence of that sort of go-to place to ask questions, the community groups, the advocates, and also I will say in the speed that it takes to do this work, a lot of groups that felt they weren't getting any attention just started their own dialogues. And so the model is already there for what works, and so but it's intense, it's labor intensive, it's time intensive, it is really getting into spaces with people where they are and listening to them. And so, I was going through a budget discussion right now, and just at the beginning of it, trying to get resources to staff up this bureau. And one of the things I want to do is create a strong team that is about focusing on community engagement and talking about the big projects that are coming our way in New York City with communities now, so that 6 years from now, when they become authorized at Congress to go into design phase, everybody's aware of what these plans are and has had a really good opportunity to weigh in on them and provide their feedback and their ideas. And to do this in a way where we begin to give up some of the power in those decisions. And so
that's exactly the point, right? How does that's got to be a very difficult process to think about from a governmental perspective.
Very much. I'll be honest with you, I've never done it before. I've been with lots of cities in the resilience world. And resilience, I should say, when I talk about resilience, I have to change this as well in my own head, because I think about resilience in that 100 Resilient Cities sort of vernacular, which is holistic resilience, which is economic resilience, it's environmental, it's climate, it's health, it's all the facets that go into making a city vibrant and be able to thrive in the face of shocks and stresses. But sometimes in New York, in the conversations when we talk about resilience, we really are talking about flood protection, right? And so I have to remember that I'm always talking about the holistic part, right?
But I don't think that I think that's part of it too, right? And maybe there's a that's part of the way, or the methodology for engaging people is to look at economic resilience, right?
I think so.
The ways of paying people to be part of the process and to contribute their local knowledge, which is so fundamental in trying to sort of come up with solutions.
That's right. And so before I got off track, I was thinking the new needs that I've put in, the budget that I'm asking for, includes these people that can go out and be present in the communities consistently, but also funding to pay people or to set up daycares or to to set up environments where people can actually come and not say, oh, we are meeting at 12 o'clock on a Tuesday downtown. We all know that doesn't work, right? But to actually be able to do that in a city is tough. And I think New York is doing some good work in that regard in some departments. But traditionally so things like these HAT studies, the Army Corps study, we haven't got there yet. So we need to accelerate better community engagement. And no, I don't really know a lot of cities that give up power, but the power is it's like a little fake power, right? Like it's only as powerful if the community and the politicians will allow you to move forward, and so isn't it in our best interest to bring everybody along together? So the models are there. There are community groups active all over the city. There are, as we talked about, there are experts in the field who know what to do. And so really, I think it makes my job a little bit easier. Many people actually have said to me since I took this role, oh, you're really brave, right? It's a really brave thing you're doing. I don't think so, because really my job is just to bring together all of the amazing work that's already happening.
So back to that question I had before about sort of like your plan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what are you thinking at this point in terms of like rallying all of these different sectors or sort of knowledge groups together? Will it be place-based? Will it be bureau-wide? Will it be interfacing with something like New York City Panel on climate change, or
All of the above.
all of the above?
I think that there are different timescales. Different projects require different types of engagement. Different types of partners require different types of engagement. Different things work, and so we're just going to have to be flexible and put the time in. But I can say honestly, authentically, the goal is to open the forum up for everybody to contribute, and then to hopefully give it enough time that we can respond to the requests, right, or to the ideas, and we can test some things out, we can play around a little bit. But the challenge here is that we know that storms will come, and so we don't have all day just to plan and plan and plan. We also have this operations component we need to get people ready for the next big storm. And we need to have that dialogue in conjunction with a rainfall storm event. So, because people don't care where the water came from, right? It's from their basement. If it's in their basement, it doesn't matter if it came from the sea or from the sky, right? Or from the ground. So we need to coordinate all those messages as well. But I'm just really excited that there are so many people in New York City that are interested in this work, that have amazing ideas, that have maybe been pushing certain ideas for a while and haven't had any traction, but now we have a place to bring all those ideas together. The work has been a bit disjointed, or I would even say opportunistic, on where we could get a little piece of funding here from this federal agency or a little piece of funding there. And we bring all of that together and look at it under one umbrella and see where we can consolidate some of these efforts and support some really cool ideas that have just been pilots now, but we can really help them soar. I think this is a really good time to do it.
So you will have a capital budget for your office to actually
I'll get
build
back
things?
to you on that, yes.
Yeah.
After my budget discussions. I mean, so here's the challenge, one of the challenges with how cities are built, as you know, and a lot of this is the 4-year political cycle and the way we do budgets. It's hard sometimes to plan ahead for where we are today. So Hurricane Sandy hit. There was a huge influx of funding to do a lot of amazing projects. Those projects are all well underway, some of them coming online now. But we really haven't got in place the enough funding to say, no problem, we've got this. Like, we can operate all of these things and maintain them in perpetuity, right? This is all, and it's a constant city struggle, not just in infrastructure and coastal infrastructure, but think about monitoring systems. You always get money to put in a gauge, but never any money to monitor, to maintain it, right? So that's a tried and true challenge that we're going to have to face every budget cycle. But the other piece of this is to think about innovative funding and financing streams. How are we going to pay for this money, for these projects? There are federal resources, there are philanthropic resources, there are other things that we can explore, but that's all part of this Bureau's work as well. So part of the vision is to think about how do we fund it? What are the regulatory reforms that we need to start thinking about planting the seeds for? For example, working with the Army Corps is limited in what we can do, or how we can approach the work, because their regulations only allow them to do so much. So if we could start to try collectively to change this, and this is a conversation that's happening nationally. Every city on the coast we meet and we talk about it. Did you get the Army Corps to do this yet? No? Okay, so can we work with them internally to figure out how to change, and then externally, what do we need to do politically as well? That's part of this. But it's not just the Army Corps. I don't want to call them out. There are other barriers to this work. And
can I ask you, so how much of the funding challenge is also sort of an organizational challenge, right? I mean, if you think of like, I have to build this thing, then it's like, all right, I need a line item in my budget to build it and then maintain it. But if this service of that thing is woven into ongoing operations of other, into development standards, into construction standards, into the, the way other infrastructure may be maintained. I mean, are there creative ways that you can see about sort of achieving some fraction of what needs to happen by sort of updating or integrating or synergizing other operational plans within the city?
It's a good idea. Yes. Yes. I don't know what more to say than that. I think we have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm seeing are there questions online? No online questions? I don't want to dominate the conversation, so please, if there's... Yeah, anyone has questions, please feel free. Yeah.
What are some of the ideas coming from New Yorkers right now that you're excited about?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so the first thing is, what I'm really excited about is how the environmental advocates have pushed back, and I don't want to sound negative because I'm actually working really well with the Army Corps, right? But I think that the fact that they've pushed back against what the Army Corps' regional plan is and wanting to make it New York focused, and Section 8106 is part of the Water Resources Development Act in 2022 that the New York advocates fought for and got the Congress to pass. That's like really exciting. And so that when I talk about work that the city didn't lead it.
Can you say more about that, just for folks who don't know what...
Sure. Okay, so this is really important, and I need you all to come and work to all the HATS workshops that we're going to have over the next 6 and 8 years, right? So this will set it up. So, and I only just learned this, so correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in the audience who knows this better, but in order for the Army Corps to take on a project, they need authorization from Congress, which happens in the WRDA, Water Resources Development Act. And U.S. Army Corps' mandate, they're only allowed to do what is authorized, and it's very specific language. And traditionally, they've been authorized to look at coastal storm surge. We know in New York City we have to also deal with sea level rise, with groundwater, with rainfall, and compound flooding, right? But that's not what they're allowed to do, and that's a really good idea, but we're not allowed to do that, and it's very process driven. It's very everything is timed, and so in the ecosystem around New York, they self-organized and wrote their Congress people and went down to Washington, D.C., and they got language put in the WRDA for 2022 that said, the Army Corps is now able to look at these other things. And there are like 10 other types of compound flood risks that they could look at. And we had to write a formal letter to say, we invoke 8106, and now that will allow us to look at these other things, which opens the door for looking at nature-based solutions even, it's just a little wedge in the process, which is great. So I'm excited to see that there is actually a way to influence the process, and it took a lot of work, right? It took a lot of heart and a lot of people, but it worked. And so now, as a city member, now I'm trying to think about the next step, which is, right, how do we implement that? What does that look like on the ground? So if we took an area that the Army Corps has a project defined for, and we actually went back and looked at it again through this lens, what would that outcome be? And then trying to go back to the Corps then and say, here's how we would do it. Does this work for you? Right? I think that's really exciting. The other thing, if I can keep going on, I think is really exciting is that, which is also a little scary for me as the practitioner involved, like doing this, but only because I just haven't figured out the process yet, is that there are so many local flood protection plans. So communities have organized, found their own resources, hired their own designers, engineering firms, architects, landscape architects, developed incredible plans. And they know their stuff. They know their stuff. When I was out at South Bronx Unite a couple of weeks ago, touring around, and they had the EPA out there talking about getting a climate change grant so that they can advance their ideas. They're not waiting for us. This is amazing. I mean, it's amazing because they know what they need. It's like half my job is done. They're so educated about the issues that we can just start from, okay, how do we help you implement this? And we have to also think about, well, there's an Army Corps project that's slated for here that is just a big wall. It's completely different than what their community-led program is. But that's the dialogue where we come in and say, okay, well, how can we get to what you want?
That's what we were talking about before, right? That's sort of like, what are the common metrics there? How do you make that? Those are vastly different visions for the protection of that community, right?
That's right.
And so
But
you're
it's
getting a clear
holistic.
message from the community, and you have congressional authorization at the Army Corps of Engineers.
Right. So I think I trailed off, but the Army Corps process, and if we go back to the WRDA, what's important to know is that HATS has proposed a number of high-level projects. We will take forward a series of those projects to WRDA 2026. It happens every 2 years. The simple projects. I'm not sure we're going to find simple projects in New York, but we're going to see what can be priced out. And then the more complex projects will go forward to 2028, and then the more complex will go to 2030. So we have a window of time right now to really organize with each other, to collectively, and figure out what do we want those projects to be that the Army Corps takes forward. And it has to go to Congress to get authorized, for them to move forward with final designs and to get the funding. And it's not guaranteed that those projects will get authorized, but if we're really coordinated, if we really have sound designs, and we do everything we need to do politically, we do everything we need to do technically, then I'm optimistic that we can actually affect some change and get these projects going. But then concurrently to that, we need to think about what are the non-structural projects that we can do as well locally, and what are the projects we don't want. Right?
Go ahead.
Hi, great talk. I actually live in a area in Queens that floods a lot, so I probably could talk your ear off about all the thoughts I've had over the decades I've lived in that neighborhood. I even have water sensors in my basement.
Oh, they're asking you to take
I'm
the mic.
sorry.
Yeah. So we start again. You live in Queens.
So I was just saying, I live in a neighborhood in Queens that floods a lot. I even have water sensors in my basement. But I've thought a lot about this, and I think your idea of the communities in the areas that are not on the coast, all the inland flooding, is really fantastic way to look at it, and I don't think it's been approached that way. I think that, you know, once you're in the outer boroughs, with some exceptions of large real estate developments or public projects or neighborhoods that have a lot of community funding coming to that, the remainder of it is single tiny little lots that are individual homeowners or individual mom and pop landlords. Are still tiny little plots. And I think that there's a real opportunity to have the communities come together and to see what they want, because living in those neighborhoods, it's water wars. Everybody just wants the water off of their property, and they don't care what it's on. And it's very hard to win a case, even if you bring about violation complaints, that somebody is changing things that impact you. And I think that the idea of coming together as a community is really amazing, because then people don't just see it in their own personal silo. And also, like, when you're talking about the communities, I think about changing the culture of what people do in their individual pieces of land. Like, some people like to have all paving, and there's parts of the world where that's considered like you made it. And then there's other places where people think like the most beautiful thing, I've worked hard, is to have a landscaped yard and you see the water drip off it. And then, you know, like, for example, in India, since you do a lot of projects like the Pani Foundation, you know, they do the water cup. But the idea is they get the community together instead of one person trying to just take care of their own property, or like the, you know, the Senegal, the green belt of Africa. Like, it's community-based, and I think that's the only way to break through this individualistic mindset once you get in the outer boroughs. Thank you.
It's an interesting point, because you're sort of bringing up a different level of governance, right? It's like that if it's individual property owners are not necessarily going to come up with a coherent plan for the whole community. They're going to solve their own problem, the top down, like the city comes in and says, this is what we're gonna do for you, that's gonna miss. But like this meta level of sort of community-based planning, it seems like, I mean, that's what I took from your comment, really like an interesting and important level at which to establish visions and goals.
And it has so many cascading benefits too if you do that, because if you think about, okay, you can get together for this common disruptor, this common pain point, which is flooding, and try to get people to think about it as a system, as a community, but you're also building social cohesion. So then when there is a next flood, people know each other better. They've got a common understanding of their issues. It will lead to other types of connections in the community, and I think it's just a win-win. The challenge, if you can lay down the structure, the city can lay down a structure, say, okay, well, we're going to meet at these places, and here are the resources we're going to bring to it, and the materials, and different languages, and just have to keep trying to bring as many people to the table, because people, this is the challenge is that people are busy, right? And they will come out if there is a flood. They will come out, and in New York, I mean, we're getting flooded so often that I don't think that's as big a problem, but it's when we don't have the floods and there's other things that take priority, other challenges that people face, and it's sometimes hard. So we have to try to actually just not have a single purpose meeting. Like, let's solve for a few things at that meeting, right? So this is beyond just one bureau, but if we can work when we're going into communities to bring other groups to the meeting as well, I think it's.
But it gets back to the resilience, right? Because,
yes.
I mean, in other words, we sort of diverted into discussions about flooding, but really your office is about resilience, and resilience is quality of life issues writ large in these communities. So like, how can you talk about flood infrastructure if you're having other problems that, maybe you can't afford to stay in your home because there's affordable housing issues, right? I mean, there's a bunch of other issues that are amplified by climate change and amplified by flooding, but you can't, and I would argue that you can't really talk about flooding without talking about those ways that flooding impacts all those other things. So it gets right into the sort of nitty-gritty of resilience, I think.
Yes, I agree. And lately, for the last few years, when I talk about resilience, I tend to interchange the words in resilience and climate change and equity. And I don't actually see a difference between any of them anymore. You almost have to think about all of these things with every conversation, with every design, or we won't actually solve our challenges. People will not actually fare well in the face of shocks and stresses. They will not bounce back well unless you think about all of these things together in your solutions.
Or only the ones who are most vocal and most sort of have the privilege to participate in the process will get what they want, and others will not, right? So it's really is important to get those other voices that can't easily participate, as we've been saying. There was another question, yeah.
I was curious about your thoughts on managed retreat as a strategy. You mentioned some unstructured methodologies. Just curious about where that fits into this conversation.
So the question was, what are my thoughts on managed retreat? That's it. So I have thoughts. I don't know a lot about the city's position on managed retreat and the work there's a whole team at the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice who is working on managed retreat. Well, and actually, I'm told we're not supposed to say managed retreat anymore, right? It is housing mobility. Strategic relocation, community relocation. So it's a move, it's dynamic. It's a dynamic conversation. It is complicated. So I will tell you, from Toronto, I talked about my sort of orientation, my lens to look at flood control is, flood management is don't be in the floodplain, right? And so if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I'm like, you need to go. Like that's a no-brainer. You're flooding, go to high ground. When I went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, about 6 years later, it was really interesting because there were people who had moved back, there were people that could not move back. And there's a whole conversation we could have about why people couldn't move back, and government structures and welfare systems that don't translate across state lines, and a whole bunch of stuff. But I didn't understand then, why would anybody move back here? Right? It took me a lot of years of traveling to different cities and talking to so many different people before I really began to understand people's connection to the land. And now, so now I don't automatically say to people, yeah, you should leave, right? But I will say that there is a time clock, there's a clock ticking on some of these areas of land. And so there's sea level rise that is happening that is going to make inundation in certain coastal areas inevitable. And if we don't make choices now and we don't set people up, then those choices will be made for us, right?
So can I push you on that? Because this is a question that I didn't ask, but I wanted to ask, but now I will ask because it just came up.
Nope, it's not on the list.
How do you, okay, so I mean, there are traditional benefit cost analyses that would justify protecting high real estate value over other lower real estate value, right? It would justify, if you take a traditional approach, you would put the most protection behind or in front of the highest real estate, highest value real estate. But obviously that's not equitable. And we were talking about the floodplain. I mean, you could argue, these cloudbursts are showing us that, and really all of New York City is a floodplain, right? You could be at risk anywhere in New York City because you could have a cloudburst right on that corner and the water will go up 2 feet and you'll get it in your basement. So given that we're all in a floodplain, and given what we recognize now as the unfairness of that sort of traditional way of just justifying protection, how do you think about a benefit cost to a measure that you might be thinking about as a resilience measure? I mean, and it ties into also nature-based solutions. Like, do you put a value on the natural system that could be there or that is there? But how do you put a monetary value on just people's attachment to place, and their right to stay in the place?
Or should you, right? I mean, you can see the flaw in that system. If we start with a capitalist system and we try to apply these values based on that lens, it's really, really hard. And scholars have tried to put economic value on environmental systems for decades now, and we're not really further ahead. And that approach, I think, was a good try, but it didn't really get the attention of the financiers, right? Because two different scales of funding, economic values that were derived. But so one thing quickly I will say is that I was on a call with the Army Corps recently, and they were saying it's a misconception that we have a property value in our cost-benefit analysis. So I need to dig into that a little bit more. But having said that, I've been involved in lots of project designs that we did do that, right? We have to stop doing that. We're going to have to create our criteria that, every article, every report you see that has a climate on the title, somewhere in the first 3 paragraphs will say underserved communities will be the most impacted by climate change. So okay, we know that. So
what are we doing about it?
We don't need to put a dollar value to that in cost benefit. Let's just go let's help those communities, right? And we're having this debate, I think, too, in New York, that, why was Manhattan the first to go with flood protection? Why not South Bronx, right? Okay, but here we are today, it's 2024. We have to decide what the new era of coastal flood protection is going to be and how we're going to approach that, and that has to be done in discussion with the communities, all of the communities. And the solutions are going to be local solutions. And I think managed retreat, what is it I need to say? Strategic relocation.
Housing mobility.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we know the issue. Should people stay in flood-inundated areas?
When they could be anywhere in the city.
Well, could they? Where are they going to go, right?
Well, no. I mean, when flood-inundated areas could mean any part of New York City.
Oh, yes, I see what you're saying. Well, so there's scales of risk. There's a big wall of coastal water coming at you versus water coming up that you may be able to do some local floodproofing, like some floodproofing on your structure. It's going to be a really interesting challenge for us to navigate our way through. There have to be places for people to go, before you can say, mandate. I don't think we're anywhere close to mandating people leaving their homes yet. But in the meantime, part of the work that I talked about earlier was making sure people really understand their risks so they can make the best informed choices for themselves, right? And then at some point, when the waters are coming, we may have a city-led or state-led or federal-led mandate, but we're not there yet. We're in the dialogue phase right now and still really trying to understand what our risks are and what people need. Right? Resilience is about, to me, we have a very formal definition of resilience, which is being able to survive, adapt, and thrive in the face of any shock or stress. But I always think it's just about living a beautiful life. And a beautiful life is different for different people. And so we have to have these individual conversations, these neighborhood scale conversations, and the city scale conversations all at once.
There was another question back there somewhere that disappeared. Ooh, go ahead.
I can just talk loud. No, I think you need to be online. Is it reaching? Okay. Back. Just a question about your holistic approach, because we do have a very whole harbor that includes New Jersey, and we've got also water coming down the Hudson River from the Hudson River Valley. How are you planning to interface and overlap with this larger questions of coastal resilience?
With the surrounding regions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the Coastal Resilience Bureau, our mandate is storm surge, tidal flooding, and sea level rise. And the HAT study looks at those things with our surrounding, from a regional lens. So I think that's a starting point, we're already talking with with New Jersey State, not so much with partners or with our neighbors upstream on the Hudson. So there's two things. There's the mitigation piece. How do we build infrastructure that helps us keep the water out? And how far, we don't want to just care about ourselves, like some of this will actually serve other areas, or what they do will affect us. And then the second part is the emergency response, and so the mutual aid piece. So as a region, how do we respond to changing climate and the events that are coming our way that will not be Sandy? Like, it's not like we're gonna have another Sandy and we'll know exactly what to do. It's gonna be something else, right? And so, that communication with the region, partners within the region, is going to be really important on those two fronts. I did put in my new needs, a sort of regional collaboration function. But I think it's no different than how we talk to each community within the city, which is that constant engagement, collaboration, open listening, figuring out what each other needs, and then pooling our resources to try to reach a common goal. And I think that at least we have a common goal. The goal is, let's stay safe, right? Stay safe, stay healthy. How you do that looks differently for different people, but I think your point is well taken, that it's not just us. We're not alone. It's not just New York. I actually live in Long Island, and all the maps I see just like stop right beside where my house is. I'm like, can you just go a little further, right? Like, because I still have to get to work. Come into New York on the Long Island Railroad, and so we can't just stop. We can't just stop at our borders, just for me at least.
But you said something that was really interesting, I think, in the response to the benefit cost analysis question, which is like that by focusing on an individual place, right? In other words, like, why do we have to talk about, why should we always be pointing out that there are certain underserved communities over and over and over again, when you should just go to those communities and do what they need, do the work there, right? So that might be one of the ways of sort of thinking about some of these cross-boundary issues, or sort of issues that aren't scalable from one place to another. It's just if you're in the right place, you're talking to the people in that place, you're by definition asking the right questions, and will arrive, if you're taking a participatory approach, at something that should be right for that place. If it's, but it's place-based and it's participatory, it sounds like.
Yes, and the next piece of that is the funding. So every time I go into a different community, I think, yes, this is where we're going to do the first project, because they're all deserving of attention and of support. and they all have good ideas, right? And then I think, oh, I have no budget. And so that's where the conversation is going to become difficult, because we have to time out when we can do what based on when we can get the funds for it. And that's the reality of city building, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're building a sewer or you're building coastal flood protection, it's all the same pot of money. So we have to do a really good job of articulating the needs and the urgency of this work to our elected officials, so that we can free up the resources that we need. And that's from every level of government, right?
There was a question back there.
Hi, my name is Mindy Fuentes. I'm from Chile. Sorry, my English. I was researching about sea level rise in the Chilean coast, and I was looking for land planning and that for adaptation. But now I'm making a research about the vulnerability of gender in climate change. Have you thought about that with these policies and this coastal resilience? How women is affected by these problems here in New York? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think that there have been some studies about gender and climate. I think just as we talked about underserved communities, I think women is implicit in that group, although not always obvious to everyone, depending on what your lenses you're looking through. I've heard most recently about the impacts of heat on women, especially pregnant women or women in lower income brackets, Black women. Like the stats are really incredible, right? So I'm glad you brought that up. It's not something that I have been like writing down at things we need to specifically address, but it is something that we need to think about as well, and how women move through space in urban areas, right? What women's needs are. Mm-hmm. That's right. I'll just repeat it for Zoom, that you were saying the women stay at home and contribute to society in so many different ways, right? So many critical functions. So you raise a good point. If we have a home that is flooding and the caregivers are there and cannot leave the home, you're not just thinking about the residents of that home, but also the people that are coming to the home to support them, and how do they get there? What are the travel routes? How do we support their mental health during these types of events, right? So they can continue to serve their communities. These are all parts of resilience that we need to be thinking about. And I think when we go into communities and we have these conversations, we'll hear that more and more as well.
Yeah, and an interesting thing, the New York City Panel on Climate Change is coming out with the next round of reports this spring, and there's something called the Flood Vulnerability Index that you've probably heard of, but where there's a whole bunch of different indicators that are being used. Gender is one of them, but I mean, it's also renter populations, the age, people who are mobility challenged, and there's actually going to be a map that shows the city with this sort of vulnerability index mapped out, so that when you could talk about coastal flooding, all right, so what are the highest vulnerability areas along the coast, or pluvial flooding due to like a cloudburst, where are those impacts? So that there's a lot of sort of interesting work coming out on that.
You know what it makes me think too is that it's really important that we think about how people behave during extreme weather events or threatening situations, because your messaging has to be tailored then to different personality types, whether that's female, male, we can talk about the stereotypes, but there are those people that will be like, no, I'm staying, I'm going to take care of the house and send everybody else away. And then there are people that will go right away, right? And you don't have to worry. People, if you issue a mandatory evacuation order, will go, but then come back as soon as they can. People that will not leave their pets. There's all these things that we need to think about in that emergency response piece, which is well known in the emergency response world. But when you're doing the planning for these types of mitigation interventions or adaptation interventions, we don't actually think about those things, right? We usually just think about the physical aspects. And so are there things we can be thinking about now in the design that would actually support people in their decision-making as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any online questions?
No, they're only asking that you repeat the questions.
Oh, okay.
Yay, good, good.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? I know we're after 7, and I think we're supposed
Are we?
to. Yes, we are. We're after 7. But take any other questions? Go ahead.
I'm kind of new to the resiliency field overall, but I'm just curious, how does New York City kind of rank compared to other larger cities or even smaller ones? Like, what are there any opportunities where you were, ready for this job interviewing and like, oh, there's a lot of great things I'm excited to get done? Anything like that that you can share?
Oh, that I liked about New York? Yes. Well, so I mentioned before how when I saw the job description, I was like, oh, I don't want to do that, right? But it's an incredible opportunity in this. It's an incredible time to be doing this work because of the leadership that's in place right now. Was it Gretchen or was Donna that mentioned Rit Agarwala, who's my commissioner? He's really thinking differently about infrastructure than we have at DEP in the past. Our deputy mayor, Joshi, is incredibly supportive of allowing us to explore the coastal infrastructure work in a way that is coastal resilience and not just coastal infrastructure, right? And so that was one big draw. I think it's an enormous challenge here. I can't understate how big a challenge we have, even if we had amazing solutions for every mile of coast. To fund it is an enormous challenge, and so I like problems. So I like sticky problems with lots of moving parts, and then trying to sort through them and at least present I like to get to the point where you can create a clear path to start to solve the solution, right? And then so for me that was a big draw, but I also think just like having the resources like NPCC to support the work is incredible. A lot of cities don't have that. They don't have that ability to take global climate data and bring it down to a local level. It's one of the biggest challenges that many cities around the world have. So I just felt like this is an incredible time. It is the right time. It's almost too late, but not too late. It's urgent work, but we have some time. It's really interesting. I actually didn't really know a lot about HATS before I started working with the city. I watched it peripherally, but I had seen work on the ESCR project, which I think is brilliant. Really, and you had ups and downs, right? We've learned a lot in the last 12 years since Sandy about how to do things differently. So I think just being able to now collect all the lessons learned and then apply that and collectively develop a new vision for coastal resilience for the future. And so the big question I have is, what is New York's relationship to the coast going to be in 2150, right? And I don't know. What would you like it to be, right? What would you like it to be? And can we capture all of these ideas and then set ourselves on a trajectory to get there, knowing that others that come behind us may say that was a whack idea, so we're going to pivot. But there was over 100 years ago when New York decided to build to protect the upstream watershed, and look at how amazing our water is today in New York City, right? Again, something not all cities have. Not all cities can say that. But what is the big idea for today that we need to be starting to implement to set ourselves up for success in the future? And just the idea that I could be a part of that, I think is really exciting. Right? I don't know the answer, so it's really just you guys have to come and make me look good, hopefully. But creating the platform to have those discussions is really cool.
And we're grateful to have such a visionary person leading that charge. So thank you for
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thanks to the AIA and to Gretchen and to Donna for organizing.
Raise this. No, bend over. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks to Laurian and to Franco for agreeing to do this. And Laurian, thank you for letting us be your first speaking engagement. Very exciting. Donna and Franco both mentioned the next New York City Climate Change Panel report, and so we're doing an event around that on May 1st, and Franco, I think you might be part of that New York City Climate Report. And we have a few other events coming up later in the year. Check our website. We post a lot of material, a lot of resources, some videos of previous programs. Laurian, 2.5 years ago, we did a 6-part series on Managed Retreat, and all of it is on our website, so I'll send you the link. Small plug, and a lot of programs since then. So anyway, thank you, everybody, for coming. Please have more snacks and cocktails, and thank you to ASLA again for sponsoring. And those of you online, take your quiz.